Every Wednesday morning at 7:42 a.m., Minh does something that would look insane to anyone watching. He takes a broken compass from his top desk drawer, the glass face shattered, the needle pointing stubbornly southeast no matter which way you turn it, and he sets it directly in front of his keyboard. Then he stares at it. For exactly 3 minutes. Today is Wednesday. The compass is on the desk. The needle is pointing southeast, same as always. And Minh is staring at it like it might suddenly decide to tell him something useful. His architecture firm, the one he built from nothing 12 years ago with nothing but a drafting table and a prayer he didn't really mean, is circling the drain. A major resort project in Da Nang got pulled last month. The client didn't even have the decency to give a reason. Just a one-line email, "We've decided to go in a different direction." He hasn't told his wife. Not the full picture, anyway. Lon is already carrying enough, the chronic fatigue that showed up 3 years ago and never left, the specialist appointments that eat through their savings like termites, the 2 kids who still believe their dad is some kind of superhero because he can sketch a building in 10 minutes flat. That he's borrowed money from 3 different sources and the repayment dates are converging like a multiple car pileup. That yesterday he caught himself Googling how to declare personal bankruptcy and then deleted his browser history like a teenager hiding something far more shameful than financial ruin. What he definitely doesn't say, that he's lost. Not just financially lost, not just professionally lost, but existentially, fundamentally, compass pointing the wrong direction lost. That he hasn't felt any kind of certainty about anything since he was 22 years old and a uniformed officer showed up at his mother's door with news about a ship that went down in the South China Sea. 20 years. 2 decades of pretending he doesn't need direction because direction is for people who still believe someone's at the wheel. The compass belonged to his father. Captain Tran Van Hung, a name that still makes Minh's chest tighten when he lets himself think about it. Hung was a merchant marine officer, the kind of man who could read the stars and the currents and the wind with an intuition that bordered on supernatural. He spent more time on container ships than he did on land, but when he was home, he filled every room he walked into. Big laugh. Big hands. Big stories about typhoons and pirates and ports in countries Minh still can't pronounce. A week before his final voyage, Hung had come home with the compass. It wasn't new even then, a brass-cased British Admiralty model from the 1960s, the kind you'd find in a maritime antique shop. He'd pressed it into 22-year-old Minh's hands and said something that has been lodged in Minh's brain like a splinter for 20 years. When you lose your way, look at this. It'll point you home. Corny? Absolutely. But Hung was a corny guy. He was also a dead guy, because 7 days after that conversation, his ship encountered a tropical depression that upgraded to a typhoon that upgraded to a maritime disaster. No mayday. No wreckage. Just silence. The kind of silence that fills up a house and never really leaves. Minh got the news on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the compass was broken. He doesn't remember dropping it, doesn't remember much about that week at all, honestly, but he remembers finding it on the floor of his childhood bedroom, the glass cracked, the needle frozen in a direction that wasn't north. He's never had it repaired. Some part of him, the part he doesn't examine too closely, believes that fixing it would be a betrayal. Like admitting that he's ready to find his way without the man who promised to guide him. So every Wednesday morning, he puts it on his desk. Every Wednesday morning, he stares at it. And every Wednesday morning, it points southeast, toward nothing, toward everything, toward a father who vanished into an ocean that never gave him back. Minh's mother still prays. She's one of those Catholic women who seems to have a direct line to heaven, the kind who can spend an hour in front of a crucifix and come out looking like she's just had the best conversation of her life. She's been telling Minh for 20 years to give it to God. To pray. To trust. To believe that there's someone out there who actually knows which direction the needle is supposed to point. Minh has never been able to do it. Not after the typhoon. Not after watching his mother light candles for a man who was already dead at the bottom of the sea. What kind of God lets a good man drown? What kind of God gives a son a compass and then takes away the only person who knew how to read it? These are not productive thoughts. Minh knows this. He's an educated man, a rational man, a man who designs buildings that stand up to earthquakes and monsoons. He doesn't believe in signs or omens or divine intervention. He believes in load-bearing walls and stress calculations and the cold, hard math of reality. The cold, hard math of reality right now is that he has 72 hours. The email came at 6:14 this morning, right as he was unlocking the office door. It was from the bank, the third bank, the one that gave him the emergency loan 6 months ago when he still believed he could turn things around. The subject line was polite. The body was not. Dear Mr. Tran, following our previous communications regarding your outstanding commercial loan agreement, Ref. VCB 2023-8842, this is to inform you that the grace period for repayment has now expired. Unless a viable repayment proposal is received within 72 hours of this notification, we will have no choice but to initiate asset seizure proceedings as outlined in Section 4.2 of your contract. We remain at your disposal to discuss any proposals you may wish to submit. The silence in the room didn't just sit there, it pressed in, thick and heavy. Minh stared at his own question hanging in the air like smoke. What kind of God lets a good man drown? He'd never said it out loud before. Not to his mother. Not to the priest at the funeral who talked about God's mysterious ways while Minh's insides were screaming. Not to anyone. And now here it was, just sitting there in his empty office at 7:47 on a Wednesday morning, with a broken compass and a bank email and 72 hours left before everything collapsed. But the answer didn't come as an answer. It came as a memory, sharp and unbidden, the way memories do when they've been waiting 2 decades for you to finally shut up long enough to hear them. It wasn't a memory of his father. It was a memory of his mother, maybe 5 years ago, standing in her tiny kitchen with its cracked tile counter and that crucifix above the stove that had hung there so long the wood had started to yellow. She was stirring something on the burner, probably, because she made pho when she was worried, and she'd said something that Minh had filed away under things Mom says that don't make sense and promptly forgotten. Until now. Kanoi, she'd said, not turning around, her voice carrying that particular calm that drove him crazy because it seemed to exist entirely independent of circumstances. You think God doesn't answer me because I don't hear a voice. But every morning I wake up and I see the sun rise through that window, she pointed with her wooden spoon at the small kitchen window facing east, and I know he's still keeping you. 20 years I've been asking him to protect my son, and every sunrise is his answer. Not words. Light. But sitting here now, with the compass needle pointing stubbornly toward nothing and the bank's polite threat glowing on his screen, the memory landed differently. His mother wasn't asking for a sign. She wasn't waiting for a burning bush or a voice from heaven or a divine intervention that would make the newspapers. She was looking at the most ordinary thing in the world, a sunrise, which happens every single day without fail whether you believe in God or not, and choosing to see it as proof that she wasn't alone. That wasn't naivety. That was a decision. A daily, deliberate decision to trust that someone was holding her son even when her son refused to be held. Minh looked down at his desk. At the email. At the compass. At his own hands, which had spent 20 years trying to build something solid enough that the ocean couldn't take it away. And then, for the first time in 2 decades, he let himself think about the closed doors. Not the ones he was facing now, those were obvious, terrifying, impossible to ignore. But the ones that had closed years ago, the ones he'd buried under layers of determination and forced optimism. The 2019 deal rose up first, unbidden, the one that had felt like his promised land. He could still remember the weight of the contract in his hands, thick and hopeful, the faint chemical sweetness of fresh photocopier ink clinging to the pages. He'd sat in that sterile conference room, sunlight catching the dust motes floating lazily above the mahogany table, and let himself believe this was finally the breakthrough. 2 weeks before signing, his phone buzzed with a 2-sentence email. The investor was out. No explanation. Just silence where a future had been, the kind of silence that tasted like cold coffee and swallowed prayers. Ing to resolve. The loan application last year that got denied by 2 banks before the third one, the one now threatening to seize everything, finally said yes. He'd read every single one of those as evidence that he wasn't good enough, smart enough, connected enough. That he was being punished. For what, he'd never been able to articulate, maybe for surviving when his father didn't, maybe for not believing the right things, maybe just for existing in a universe that seemed fundamentally hostile to his happiness. But what if? What if he'd read them wrong? The 2019 investor, the one who vanished 2 weeks before signing, had been indicted 18 months later for fraud. A whole Ponzi scheme, dozens of developers caught in it, some of them still fighting lawsuits. Minh had read the news article at the time and felt nothing but a vague, distant relief that he'd dodged a bullet. He hadn't connected it to anything larger. He hadn't let himself. The 2021 partnership? That company had gone under in 2022. Bankruptcy, layoffs, a whole mess that would have dragged Minh's firm down with it if he'd been tied to them. The denied loans. The timing. The delays. The frustrating, inexplicable, maddening delays that had felt like the universe telling him no, no, no over and over again. POV, you spend 20 years thinking God is slamming doors in your face, and then one Wednesday morning you realize he might have been locking the ones that led off a cliff. Minh's hand moved to the compass before his brain gave it permission. He picked it up, this broken, useless thing he'd been staring at every Wednesday for 2 decades, and for the first time, he didn't look at the shattered glass. He turned it over. The back was tarnished, scratched, worn smooth in places from years of being handled by a man who was now at the bottom of the South China Sea. But the engraving was still there, barely visible, the letters thin and faded. The Lord is your guide. Minh had never noticed it. 20 years of staring at this compass, and he'd never once turned it over. He'd been so focused on the broken needle, the cracked glass, the direction it couldn't point, that he'd missed the whole point. His father didn't trust the compass. His father trusted the one who made direction itself. The compass was just a symbol. A reminder. A tangible thing you could hold on to when the fog rolled in and you couldn't see the stars. The needle pointed southeast because the glass was broken and the mechanism was damaged, not because southeast had any meaning, not because his father was trying to send him some message from beyond the grave. The compass was broken because Minh had dropped it on the worst day of his life, and he'd never fixed it because fixing it felt like moving on, and moving on felt like betrayal, and betrayal felt like the only thing he had left to give. But what if the betrayal wasn't moving on? Maybe you opened your eyes this morning and the first thing you felt wasn't hope, it was the weight. The deadline you can't meet. The conversation you've been avoiding. The bank notification you're afraid to open. The prayer you whispered 3 months ago that still feels like it bounced off the ceiling and landed nowhere. POV, you spend years convinced that God is silent, that he's withholding, that he's punishing you for something you can't even name, and then one ordinary morning, you realize the silence wasn't absence. It was protection. The closed doors weren't rejection. They were redirection. The delays weren't cruelty. They were mercy in a disguise you couldn't recognize because you were too busy resenting the wait. What if the very thing making you question God's goodness is actually the evidence of it? Faith isn't believing God will do what you want. Faith is trusting that he's already doing what's best even when your understanding hasn't caught up yet. That's the kind of faith that doesn't crumble when the bank says no. It doesn't evaporate when the relationship ends. It doesn't shatter when the diagnosis comes back positive. It holds. Not because the circumstances are good, but because the God orchestrating them is. There's this verse in Psalm 90, verse 17. It says, "May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us, establish the work of our hands for us." Now, that word establish, in the original Hebrew, it's kohen. And it doesn't just mean bless what we're already doing. It means to set right, to make firm, to adjust the direction of something that's gone off course. Sometimes what you need isn't a brand new door. What you need is a recalibration of your vision so you can finally see the doors that have been open all along, the ones you've been walking past because you were so fixated on the door that slammed shut 3 years ago. Minh spent 2 decades staring at a broken compass, convinced it was proof that God had abandoned him. But the compass was never the point. The engraving on the back was, "The Lord is your guide." His father didn't trust a device. He trusted the one who invented north and south and east and west. The compass was just a reminder. A tangible thing to hold on to when the fog rolled in. What are you holding on to that was only ever meant to be a reminder, but you've turned it into your entire navigation system? The job title that defines your worth. The relationship status that dictates your joy. The bank balance that determines whether you sleep peacefully or stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. The approval of people who don't even think about you half as much as you think about them. None of those things were designed to be your compass. They're too fragile. Too temporary. Too easily shattered when life drops them on a tile floor. So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Today. Take a piece of paper, an actual, physical piece of paper. Write down the one thing you've been white-knuckling. The fear that's been distorting your direction. The situation you've been trying to control so hard your hands are bleeding from the effort. Maybe it's a financial decision. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a future you've already mapped out in your head and you're terrified God might have a different route. Write it down. And then, this is the prophetic act part, and no, it's not superstition, it's surrender made physical. Place that piece of paper under your Bible. Or under a cross. Or on your prayer altar. Somewhere that represents the authority of God in your life. You're not manipulating the universe. You're positioning your heart. You're saying with your hands what your soul is still learning to whisper, this is yours now. I'm done trying to be the cartographer of my own destiny. You draw the map. I'll walk the road. If that's where you are today, if you're ready to stop gripping the shattered compass and start trusting the one who knows exactly where you are even when you don't, I want you to type this in the comments. Not for me. For you. As a declaration. As a marker in the ground that says this was the day something shifted. Type this, I choose to trust God, not lean on my own understanding. Type it even if your hands are shaking. Especially if your hands are shaking. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to stop letting fear hold the pen. Father, I come to you this morning, and I'm not coming with polished words or perfect theology. I'm coming tired. I'm coming with calloused hands from gripping things you never asked me to carry. I'm coming with a mind that's been running laps around the same anxious track for weeks, 4 months, 4 years. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every time I mistook your silence for abandonment. Every time I read closed doors as rejection instead of protection. Every time I treated you like a vending machine for my plans instead of the author of a story I can't see the ending of yet. Lord, give me wisdom, not the kind that comes from Google or self-help books or the well-meaning advice of friends who love me but don't know the full picture. Give me the wisdom that comes from above. The kind that helps me distinguish between a door I'm supposed to walk through and a door I'm supposed to finally stop knocking on. Lord, establish the work of my hands. Not just the projects I proudly show others, but the quiet, unseen labor, the emails I write with care, the child I tuck in when I'm already spent, the apology I offer when pride wants to win. Take what is crooked in my motivations and gently straighten it. If I'm pouring years into something you never asked me to build, give me the courage to lay it down. And let me feel the peace of that hospital waiting room where I finally stopped pacing and just sat. That peace which didn't come with answers, but came with your presence. The peace that let me sleep when the numbers on the screen screamed otherwise. Align my ambitions with your purposes, until what I want and what you want become the same thing. LD, give me the courage to walk away from it, even if I've already invested years. And give me courage. Not the courage to move mountains in a single dramatic moment. The courage to take one small step today. Just one.